Hi, I'm Bernie Spalstad, the president of Newport Beach Historical Society, and I'm here to interview Lenard Davis, who is our secretary of our board of directors. And Lenard, why don't you take from here?
Okay. Oh, hi, I'm Lenard Davis. I've lived in Newport Beach just about all my life. And my parents moved here when I was 2. My dad had a business up in Burbank area, and we lived there. And he kind of got bought out by rivals. They wanted to kind of get him out of town, so he sent him off to Orange County to do his R&D down here. So he bought some property in Santa Ana and was one of the first people, I hate to say it, rip out orange trees to put in industrial buildings on Grand Avenue. And my mom said, well, if we're going to live down here, let's move to the beach. And so they rented a house on Lido Isle on Via Waziers, and remarkably, that house is still standing. And they lived there for, I guess, maybe a year, I suppose. I was just 2, I barely remember the place. And then they bought a house on the bayfront, and at 615 Sud. And that house has been torn down, and then
Bayfront on the island?
Yeah, on Lido Isle. And
on Lido Isle?
On Lido Isle, yeah.
Okay.
And, you know, there's islands and there's isles. Lido is called Lido Isle. Okay. And the late Mel Richley would want me to insist on saying that. But the other one is Linda Isle. The others are Balboa Island and so forth. Anyway, so they bought a bayfront house, and it was a nice place. It had a pier out front, and my backyard was the beach, and I was quite the architect and developer myself, building sandcastles almost every day. We lived next door to Mayor Dora Hill. She was the first female mayor of Newport Beach. And her husband, Ned, helped to found the Bank of Newport with Dick Richards, who had the market, which was down the street from us. Got a couple stories about that, too. But anyway, so we grew up there, and I dug so many, and there was a pier out in the middle of our property, and I used to build my sandcastles on the left side facing the bay, kind of in front of where the Hills lived. But I dug in the sand so much that it washed part of the beach away. So she kind of got mad, and they had their beach dredged and put more sand there, and I was told to build my development on the other side. So anyway, that was my memory of her. But anyway, I later interviewed her for a book which I wrote, which I'll talk about later. But so I grew up and went to a bunch of different schools, because I went to a private school for a while, and then we moved to Hawaii for about 6 months, and then came back, and I went to Newport Elementary. And then eventually I spent 1 year at Ensign for 6th grade, and then I went to Carden Hall, which is just around the corner from here where I live in Newport Crest, and finished 8th grade there, and then did Harbor High School for 4 years. And that was my local education. Then I went to Orange Coast College, and I was going to study architecture, and got into the program there. And they have a program where after 2 years you get transferred to Cal Poly Pomona, or San Luis Obispo. I'm sorry, the architecture program there. And but I only lasted a year in that program because I was talked into my Sunday school teacher to attend Principia College, which is in Illinois. And I went back and visited and fell in love with the place, and ended up going there and changing my major because they didn't have architecture, so they had history and political science and journalism. And I think I had a different major every year of college. And but I graduated there and came back. And
what was your graduation major?
Well, it ended up being history, okay, and with a humanities minor. And so I came back to Newport Beach. And this was in 1975, and I got admitted to the teacher education program at UC Irvine, which I could just go down the street and get on the bus and take it over there, which was convenient. And so I did that and made my money.
Tell us a little bit about what was in Newport and those times. In other words, was there anything around hardly at the...
Well, Lido Isle was pretty well developed by then. There were quite a few vacant lots still. And I remember it was very common for us kids to play there and play sandlot baseball or whatever. I remember we were riding around in our convertible one time, and Dad was looking at the various vacant lots. And he decided to buy one on Via Genoa. And it's kind of a triangle pie shape at 101 Genoa. And so he bought this lot. And about a year later, Milton Bren, the father of Donald, wanted to buy that and build a house there. And he basically offered my dad what he'd paid for it, which my dad thought was a great deal, so he sold it for $20,000. Well, you know, my parents always bought really good property, but they always sold at the wrong time. So Milton Bren built this house. It had a funny accordion-shaped roof, which is the curves of the house. The house is still there, but they've changed the way it looked. And later, the Brens did a flip with Dick Powell and June Allison, who lived on Harbor Island. And they swapped houses so that Dick Powell and June Allison ended up in our property that we owned. A few years later, my parents sold the bayfront that we had and bought a house on Genoa just 2 doors down from that house where June Allison lived. And all the years that she was there, that we were there for 8 years, I never saw her except one time driving out of her garage. She had a real brat as a son, and so he was troublesome. But I never saw her. But they were our neighbors. And some other neighbors around, I know Jane Wyman, Reagan's ex-wife, had a home on Nord. And a few years ago, they had an estate sale after she died, and I bought a dresser, and it was a sort of a mahogany Queen Anne style, which matches the furniture I have upstairs. And it's the kind of drawer that you'd keep your socks and underwear in and whatever. And I know she was married to Ronald Reagan once, so I like to think that I have the Ronald Reagan's drawers that he kept his socks in. So anyway, I don't know if that's true or not, but
one of the things you'd be interested in is that our former treasurer, Jim Rubel, he actually lived on Lido Isle too.
Oh, Lido Isle, you mean?
I mean,
yeah, because
Lido Isle.
Because his father was president of the association, because it's in my book, my Lido Isle book. But the name is in there, but Jim Rubel.
Yeah, we just found that out.
They have their stories. Their house is another story. There was when Lido Isle was developed by a guy by the name of William Crittenden. He became the first president of the Lido Isle Community Association, known as LICA, and he built this 3-story house. And there's a height limit on Lido. You can't build 3 stories. You know, you can't build over 24 feet. But this house is still there. It's the oldest house on Lido Isle, and it towers over all the others. And if you go along the Via Lido Sud side from the bayfront, you can't miss it. It's kind of near it's in the end in the 900 block. And apparently Jim lived in that house too. And so anyway, I went to school with John Wayne's daughter, Aisa Wayne. I remember her at Carden Hall. So we had a few movie stars around in those days. And when I went to Carden Hall, for a couple of years, my parents started living in separate houses, and my grandmother had passed away, and my mom had a little house in Costa Mesa, which is still there by the Lions Park. And Carden Hall was right in between the two, so once in a while, I'd go home to Toledo to stay with my dad, and sometimes I was on my bike. So usually I would be told, okay, tonight you're going down there, and tonight you're going up here. Or the teacher would tell me or something. But I liked the house in Lido because that's where all my friends were, and I had a friend who would ride bikes with me from school, from Carden Hall, and I got to where I'd call it Mom, said, Mom, I decided to just go to Lido tonight, and my dad didn't have any food in the refrigerator. He liked his martini, so there was always a jar of olives in there, and maybe some tonic water in case he wanted a gin and tonic, and some knockwurst, and some Grey Poupon mustard, and that was all that was in the refrigerator. But Richard's Market, which had been built by Dick Richards back in the 40s, right on the corner near Newport Boulevard and Via Lido. It's now a West Marine, tragically. I mean, West Marine's a good store, but Richards Market was the best. And apparently he was the first person to really develop the supermarkets as we know it today. I mean, you didn't have Safeways and Kroger's and all these big stores back in those days, but he kind of started that. And he had a deli in there. And my dad had an account, so I'd just go in there and I'd go through the deli when I was going home to his house because he wouldn't get home till late. And I would pick out what I wanted. Usually their beef stroganoff was so good. And So I would pick out what I want, and I'd go up to the checkout counter. I said, just charge it to the account of Arthur C. Davis. And that I didn't need cash, so that was great. My sister one time went there, and she told her friends to take some shopping carts and fill them up with stuff because she was going to have a party when my parents were gone. And my dad got the bill at the end of the month and went through the roof. And he said, well, who spent all this money? He says, well, I had a party. He says, well, I hope you didn't water down my gin. So we knew not to do that. My brother was the troublemaker in the family. He one time kidnapped a Santa Claus, a life-size mannequin from Corona del Mar, belonging to a prominent Newport Beach judge, and I think we know who that judge was. Must have been Judge Gardner. But anyway, and brought it home and hung it by a noose next to our Christmas tree until my mother finally made him take it down. And he left a ransom note, apparently, but they never paid the ransom, so he never sent the Santa Claus back. So if you're listening to this, Judge Gardner's descendants, I'm sorry, I had nothing to do with it. But I do remember that. He also had an old car that he took down to the beach one time to drive in the sand, and a wave came and kind of pulled it out in the sea, so he stripped the license plates off and abandoned the car. But they traced him down through the VIN numbers, which was stamped on the engine. So the police came by our house more than once on my brother's account. But he's living in Florida now, so no more trouble. So anyway, so I got finished UCI, and I did my student teaching at Harbor High School, and I was subbing for a few years, and that's eventually.
What subject?
Well, I did history mostly, but when you're a substitute, they call you in for everything, including girls' PE. But there was a woodshop teacher who liked me and had me sub for him all the time, and because I wasn't afraid of the kids, and I wasn't afraid to have them do the machinery and stuff. And he said, "Oh, I can use whatever wood I want and mix stuff. I've still got a couple of things that I made there while on the period off when the kids weren't there." But they called me a lot because I was always willing to go to the junior high schools, and a lot of subs weren't. So, in those days, Newport was growing. I saw a picture a few days ago, and I forget where I saw it, but it showed Newport Beach from the air, and virtually all of the area beyond the bay, the upper bay where Fashion Island is, and just rolling hills, there's nothing there. And the old part of Newport was there, but the center of the city has totally shifted. I mean, it used to be centered down. Now City Hall was right down here on Newport Boulevard, where the Lido House Hotel is now. But the whole center of the gravitational and population center of the city has shifted towards Fashion Island, which is now basically the middle of the city. And of course, the Irvine Company planned it that way, I'm sure. But but I remember when it was all just fields out there, and cornfields and orange groves, and all the way through Irvine and everywhere else. And so the good old days, I guess. So.
Tell me about your books. Somewhere your books came in that you've written.
It was around the mid-1980s that I started working on this book, and it's called Newport, a Novel. I really enjoyed the books by James Michener, and he would start from the early eons ago when the rivers were forming, the mountains or the Hawaiian Islands were bubbling up out of the Pacific Ocean with the volcanoes and that. And then he would get into the various peoples that came and went and lived there, and the people who came and conquered them. And he always wove a story together. And so I thought, well, Newport could do that. And I read a book called Chesapeake by Michener, and that's the one that really inspired me, because I thought, well, they have a bay, we have a bay, our bay has a story. And so I came up with this book. And I wrote it back in the 80s, and it sat on the shelf for 20 years because I was busy trying to get my teaching career going and trying to find a book agent and all that. I didn't know what to do. So eventually, though, I have a local friend who's sort of in the publishing business. He said, well, I could help you get that published. And so we worked out a deal and did a first printing of that. And it was, sold them out, and but anyway, so I finally got the book published, and it's available. It's from Author House, and you can get it online through Amazon or Author House, and it's called Newport, a novel by Leonard Davis. And the cover here, by that time I was teaching, ended up teaching junior high in Santa Ana District for several years. And so a fellow teacher did the cover. I told him what I want. I said, well, I want a picture of us old Chris Craft speedboat speeding by the pavilion. And so that's the cover of the book. But
that's great.
It is available, and it's available on ebooks as well. So I recommend it. And I got a nice review from former Mayor Keith Curry. Did a review in the pilot about it, and he liked it too. So, and one of the comments on the back is, James Michener, move over. So
that's good.
So that's some testimonials. Then I got into writing other things, and having grown up on Lido Isle, I decided, well, there's a book about Balboa Island, and it's about this size and shape. And I thought, well, Lido needs a book like that. And having grown up there, I knew a lot of the history. I knew a lot of people there. I still socialized down there. And so this was another one of my projects, and have lots of old pictures inside of it. And I got some old pictures of the harbor, and I talked to a lot of the people who live there and former commodores of the yacht club and so forth. And so that has been a sellout locally. It is not available online because I went through a private publisher for that. And it's had 2 editions, and they are sold out, and everybody on Lido wants that book. It's kind of a limited audience, because anybody who doesn't live on Lido probably doesn't care about it, but it's a best-selling book on Lido Isle, so, and I can say that. So, and then, well, in 1976, my mom sold the Lido house and bought the condo that I'm in here now. And just the other day, I celebrated my 45th anniversary living in this house. And about a year later, she got married and moved to Garden Grove. Why anybody would move there, but she, much to my bewilderment, she said, well, you stay here because you need a place to live, and I don't want to sell it. And so I like to say my mom got married. I got my mom married off and out of the house, and she left me stuck here, darn it. And I've been here ever since. And eventually she moved back to Lido Isle because we bought a place down there about 20 years ago. And our 4th house. Mel Richley once said that if you live on, you're not a true Lido resident until you've had at least 2 houses. So we've had 4 now down there. So we're doing good. And so anyway, and after the success of the Lido book, I thought, well, Newport Crest needs a book. And I've lived here over 40 years, and I know everybody and what's going on. And so I had a lot of things at my fingertips. And so one of my latest creations is this book, which is not quite sold out. I got a few copies left, but the cover is based on the original sales brochure, which is why it has that sort of 1970s brown color. But it has all the floor plans inside of it. And also, all the streets here are named after boats. I live on Goodwill Court, and this was a big ship that was prominent in Newport Harbor for many years. And I have little stories about all the boats. And Imaloa, and Kamali'i, and various sailboats. A lot of them are Pacific racing boats. A lot of them were in the Transpac race. And a couple of interesting stories. There's one, I think it's the Kamali'i, that it was some pirates, came, boarded the ship, forced the captain and his crew to sail out to sea, and then they were going to toss them overboard. And anyway, and then they got rescued, and so it ended up okay. But the Goodwill did not have such a good ending. It went off the rocks down off Baja, California, back in '69. It was owned by a guy named Ralph Larrabee, and he was quite infamous and kind of a rake of a reputation. And he had gold bullion bricks back at a time when it was illegal to have them. And he kept them in the bottom of his boat, supposedly for ballast. But he would show them off occasionally when people would be on his boat. He'd bring some out in the stateroom and show them off and brag about it. Well, when they found the wreck of the ship, he and the gold was gone, he was gone, all the crew members, nobody knows what happened to them. It's suspected that some of the crew were responsible for doing him in and running off with the gold and scuttling the boat. Who knows? It's been a mystery that has never been solved in Newport Beach. So, but it was a beautiful ship. I remember as a kid, it was berthed off of just right down the marina, right by the Newport Boulevard Bridge. So,
now tell us about your. It's not the correct terminology, but your village down in the garage.
Oh, yeah, well,
fabulous, which we'll take a picture of in a minute. But
well, it all started when I think I bought my first Matchbox car. It was back in 1963 or so, a little Mercedes. I still have it, but it's kind of corroded and rusty looking now. But and I had a friend who had a train set in his garage and had a little mountain on it, and it was hung from the ceiling, and they had a little hoist and hoisted it down. But they never hoisted it down very much, so I didn't get to play with it very much. But I started collecting a few little houses, that I bought, little plastic kits and things. And I'd set up I had a table in my bedroom, and I had a little city there, and my friends would come over. We'd play with the Matchbox cars and drive around and, this and that. And I always dreamed of having this, big train layout. And I went to Disneyland one time, and they used to have a big exhibit there, the General Electric Carousel of Progress. I don't know if you remember that, Bernie, but they had you sat in this auditorium, which like a donut sort of revolved around the stage, and the stage was divided into 4 different compartments, and so the seats would move around, and you'd see the next show there or whatever. And then when you got done, you went, I think, down this ramp, and there was this huge city with lights and everything, that just as far as you could see in this huge building. And I thought, wow, I would love to have that in my garage. And be careful what you wish for. So I started building this setup years ago. After I'd lived here about 15 years by that time. It was 83, I think I began building that. And they say the difference between men and boys is the price of their toys. And, it costs some money building that. But it's all electrified. The houses light up. The streetcars, well, I have an urban scene. So instead of a train, I've got the old Pacific Red Car replicas. Problem is that the trains don't really work right now. You have to keep the tracks clean, and I neglect that. So once in a while, I'll go down there and spend a couple hours sanding down the tracks, and then it'll work for a month or so, and then I'll show it off. But anyway, so I started building houses, and when I was studying architecture, I learned how to build models of things. So a lot of the houses down there are ones that I built myself, like architects would build, say, a model of your house if you were going to have a house built. And so anyway, it's taken on a life of its own.
Tell us the name of this project.
It's called The City of Little Beach.
Yeah, this is phenomenal.
Yeah.
And you'll see pictures of this shortly, but this is just unbelievable scene.
Now here's something funny, because if you go online and Google Little Beach, there's a nude beach on Maui called Little Beach, and so that's what you see. So it's not the same Little Beach, but but actually we have a yacht club, and to be a member of the Little Beach Yacht Club, you have to take me out to dinner, and that's the price, and then you become a member. I give people little cards. One time I was up in San Francisco, and I'm a member of the Lido Isle Yacht Club, which is a real yacht club on Lido. And I went into the St. Francis Yacht Club, and a time, they're not doing reciprocals so much anymore like they used to, but a lot of yacht clubs, you show your yacht club card, you can go around the world and say, I'm in this yacht club, and they'll let you in. So I handed my Lido card and the Little Beach card, and the woman says, oh, either one's fine. And I've had friends that have used them to get into places. So there is some value to being a member of the Little Beach Yacht Club. And my sister is the Commodore currently. I was a Commodore for years, but she wanted to be Commodore, so she's the Commodore now. And then I have a theater group which has not met in a year due to the COVID thing, but it's called the Little Beach Players, and we sit and read plays and that sort of thing. And then I had a little newspaper which I put out every time they met called the Little Beach Journal. So it kind of looks like our Newport Harbor Historical Society newsletter. But so the city of Little Beach has been kind of quiet lately because of the shutdown. The whole sound's shut down, and nothing's going on for a year. But it's the way it goes.
Well, Lenard is our guru for our newspaper, so he really does a fantastic job putting our newspaper out, newsletter, every month, just about every couple months.
About time to start another one, I guess. Well, when I was in college, I was editor of my college newspaper, and then I also, when I taught school, I was the journalism advisor for 20 years, and we won a few awards, and so I had some experience with that sort of thing. So
that's a good job. Things that
I'm just trying to think.
Remember about how
some things
grown and funny anecdotes. You said you had a few anecdotes.
Let's see. I know that. Oh, I know. My dad. We had a dock, a pier and slip outside of our house, and he had a 40-foot Chris Craft boat, which I have a nice picture of in the den up there. Which maybe you can take a shot of that when we're done. We would go out there a lot. Every Sunday he'd take the boat. I had a partner. And I remember whenever there was work to be done on the boat, the partner was usually down in the bilge mucking around with the engine and getting his hands dirty. My dad would always sit in the living room drinking his martinis and read the papers. But eventually he kind of tired of the boat and they sold it. But we had an available slip there. So my dad knew one of the former commodores of the yacht club, a guy named George Carrington. And so George kept his boat there for a couple of years. And I guess the deal was that he would buy my dad a case of gin once a month. Well, one day I noticed that Carrington's boat was dipping a little low on the bow. And it was getting lower, and it was filling up with water, obviously, very slowly. And I told my dad, I said, "Dad, I think that boat is sinking." He says, let the damn thing sink. That guy hasn't given me my gin in 3 months. So, and finally, I guess some neighbor called the harbor patrol, and they came and pumped it out, and then it got towed away. And I don't think Dad ever said anything to Mr. Carrington again after that. I think they kind of parted ways. But I just remember the boat sinking, and that sort of thing. I remember the time I took sailing lessons from the yacht club, and I was put in charge of the tiller, and when you come around, you're supposed to say, "turning about," and so I turned the tiller and didn't say that, and the boom hit the instructor right in the head, knocked his glasses off, and without a beat, he dove into the water to get his expensive sunglasses. He did manage to get them, but he was mad at me, and I was told I couldn't sail the boat anymore after that. So things like that. But growing up, sailing was part of our culture. But the problem was my parents were a little on the, shall I say, frugal side, and the boat of choice in those days was a Lido 14, which was developed locally. And actually, if you read my Lido Isle book, there's a little blurb in there about the Lido 14. But we had something called a Penguin. There were only 3 of them in the harbor, and so there weren't any regattas for them. So we never got into the racing part of it, which is too bad because it would have been nice to have done that. But we just didn't have the cool boats. We didn't have the Snowbird or even a Sabot or a Lido 14. We had a Penguin. And then my brother finally got rid of it and bought this funny homemade boat. It was long and skinny and looked like a cigar, so we called it El Ropo, which is a Mexican cigar brand, I guess. And it sailed literally on its side, and it was a weird-looking thing. But anyway, and I never dared go out. It was terrifying to go out on that boat because you always felt you were going to tip over on it. It was very tipsy. So we did have a little boating when I was a kid. But I noticed that when my dad sold his boat, all those people that would come every week to go on the boat, we never saw hardly any of them again. So I guess that's the way it goes. But I remember we would go out every week, and there'd be food and goodies and stuff, and we'd go out in the ocean, sometimes go to Catalina. Now, I know when you go to Avalon today, they come on your boat and inspect, and they drop a tablet down the loo, and you flush it. And if anything comes out of your boat that turns orange, so they can tell whether you've got a septic system in your boat. Well, in those days, they didn't require that, and we had an old boat that had a bilge pump and a pump toilet, no electronics on it at all. And I remember one time I was swimming, around the boat. And my sister apparently had used the bathroom, and all this, literally, shit started coming out the side of the boat right at me. You'd get thrown out of the harbor there today if you did that, but there was no such law, I guess, back in the 50s. But Newport was a little bit of a quieter town. This area hasn't changed so much. It's gotten a little bit, the traffic's gotten busier, but if you drive down the peninsula, it still looks pretty much like it did then. The real change in town has been to the south and the east, on the other side of where Corona del Mar is, where outside of the old part of Corona del Mar, all that construction and all that development has taken place, and so that has changed. And then, of course, my high school, Newport Harbor, which was built in 1930, I was class of 71. And a few years ago, they determined that the tower, or that the whole building, the original building, Robbins Hall, was not earthquake-proof. And so they decided to tear the whole thing down. And they rebuilt it. It looks almost exactly like the original one. But when they went to knock that tower over, they pounded that thing, and it didn't fall over. And it finally came down intact. It did not crumble, or it just fell down like a big piece. I mean, that thing would have survived any earthquake. So I was very mad that they did that, because, they rebuilt it. It looks like the old one, but it's not the same. And inside, it's not the same at all. And I don't know. I like historical buildings, and I hate to see them go. So I miss our old city hall too. It was a nice place. But
I don't know how you can miss that.
well, it was a nice place, and it was convenient. And at least if you live on this side of town, which used to be the center of town, as I said before, it was easy to get to. Now you got to drive all the way down to Fashion Island, and that's outside my 3-mile radius. So, and I miss Richard's Market. That was a great place to shop, and they would have an organ playing while you were in there shopping. And like I said, we had a charge account, and so. But those are the good old days.
Well, thank you very much, Leonard.
Yeah, Leonard Davis is my name, and hopefully my fame will come from my books one of these days. We'll see. I don't know.
Thank you again.